so that I can post this later on if anyone needs to check it out. Okay, so what we're going to start off with here is sort of the basic idea of text inside of Cinema 4D. So first thing I'm going to do here, and of course feel free to check this out. This is sort of, the basic idea of what we're going to go to, but I'm going to show you all of this directly right now. But what we're going to do first here is I'm going to make sure I switch over to the right screen. All right, we're good here. All right, so the first thing I'm going to ask for you guys is let me get a name of a favorite character from a TV show or movie. And that's what I will use for the example here. So write it out in the chat or speak it out really fast. Okay, John Wick is cool, but I've already done that, so you got to pick another one. Daredevil, okay. Wanda, Spider-Man. Okay, we can do a couple of those. Oh, I didn't even see that. Yeah, so Goofy. Okay, good. So we got some examples here. Okay, cool. So inside of Cinema 4D, there are a couple different ways you can access the ability to make type inside of Cinema 4D. And I'm going to show you two of the ways. One is one way that we'll use eventually when we do more stuff from Illustrator and making sort of custom logos inside of Cinema 4D. And then there's another way that has been renamed recently that is probably the easier way to go about it. But I'll show you the sort of long way first. So up here at the top, and I'm going to make sure to highlight it, is the spline pen tool. So inside of here, there are a number of different tools that you can use, and these work like splines would inside of Illustrator or Photoshop. And these, can do various different things. You can see some of here are rectangles, cogwheels, flowers. But of course, what we're going to focus on today is the text. Yes, I am. Thank you for double checking. So once you are able to access the text tool, and if you can't access it there, it's also in Create menu, Spline, Text Spline. So it's also in the menus, since I know sometimes these menu items up here are a bit harder to access. But once you're able to access that, you'll have the Text Spline tool here. And then I believe the first one that was said was Daredevil. So I can update that over here in the object properties. And if I reposition my scene, you can see that now I have Daredevil in my scene. Not sure if it's 2Ds in the name, but that's fine. We'll leave it like that. So this is sort of our main way that we're going to be able to adjust text inside of the text spline object inside of Cinema 4D. And there are a number of different properties. As you can see below here, we have the ability to change the font. So, you never want to use the default font. So I'm just going to switch to Showcard Gothic because I have that here and it looks a bit more fun. Oh, is it? Thanks for letting me know that though. But yeah, so you can see here that I changed the font here and it, changes the whole case here. So any system fonts that you have on your computer, are totally acceptable to use. You can use Wingdings that are more symbol fonts. If you have other fonts from other languages, if you have them installed, you can use those as well. So any font that you want to use is perfectly fine to use. Some fonts might translate better in 3D than others. So if anyone has taken any sort of typography or design classes, you'll know that there can be a lot that goes into developing your type, and those rules also apply for doing stuff in 3D. You just also have to keep in mind that this is also in the third dimension as well, or it has a third dimension. Below that, you can see that there's other tools that we can adjust, such as your alignment. So center align text or middle align text is also a thing. You can also adjust your horizontal spacing, also known as tracking, as well as vertical spacing if we do have multiple lines of our text as well. So that's also a thing that you can do here. You also have the ability to do kerning. So there's a way to do 3D kerning inside of here. You can also adjust which way it's facing by default. And this is just the spline that we're looking at right now, which is essentially just a representation of an outline. So it doesn't actually have anything physical yet, which I'll explain that more in a second here. Below that, we just have intermediate points, and all this means is this is sort of the accuracy or how clean the line is around the edges of your type. So you'll notice that depending on which ways you go and which types you have, the text will look more crunchy or less crunchy. Usually it's not too bad when it's just a spline, but once we make this 3D, you'll notice that different things are applied differently. So if you've already tried so far, you might have noticed that if I were to come up to the top here and click the button to render in the viewport, we're not going to see anything. And that's because splines don't actually have any geometry or any shape to them by default. They're pretty much just a representation of what shape will be. In order to actually give them volume and give them any sort of substance and shape, we need to add an extrude object into our scene. So this is located right up here at the top. This is our extrude object. So you can actually click it once and it'll add it to your scene, or if you were to click and hold it, you can see that there are other objects that we can use in our scene. But we're just going to be focusing on the extrude object for right now. And in the tools here, let's see if I can remember where that actually is, because I usually almost always go up there to actually have access to it. Okay, so if you need to go to the menu system, it is in create, generate, and then you can see that there are a whole bunch of tools here. Specifically, we're going to be using the extrude. So if you click this, it'll add it into our scene, and by default, the text spline won't go into it. You're going to need to click it, left click and hold on it, drag it, and make it and push it underneath the extrude object. Once you're holding on top of it, you'll notice that I have sort of a down arrow, and that means that it's going to be going below it in the hierarchy. And then, as you can see, as soon as I do that, now our text actually has some geometry to it. And if I were to use the shortcut key Control R to render, you can see that in the viewport now I have my text and it has volume to it, and I can render this out and I can say, yay, I got 3D text in my scene. So that's sort of one of the process that you can go through creating text inside of Cinema 4D. And you'll notice that on the extrude object itself, there are a number of different tools that we can modify now, such as the offset, which is the depth of the text, so I can make it go forward. There's also the direction, which by default, usually auto is really good, but sometimes depending on what you're doing, you might need to set it specifically, especially when we get into working with 3D logos. You'll need to keep in mind the direction. And then at the end here, there's also caps. And what caps allows you to do is to basically give you a different styling for the edges of your text. So right now, it's just sort of a hard edge, pretty linear. And if you know anything about the real world or just sort of the concept of how things are usually made, usually there's never any straight edges in real life, or they're like really, really sharp, but if you look really closely, maybe even under a microscope, even a knife will have a bit of a bevel edge at the sort of points. So by default, it has a hard edge. That's not good. We would want to modify it using the caps here in order to make it a bit more smoother. So the quick way to do this is you'll see that there's a button here that says load presets. And if you click that, you'll see that there's a bunch of different options here. And I encourage you to play around, see which one of these you like, which one of these you don't like. But if I just click the first one, which is rounding, basic rounding, you can see that just by doing that, now I have sort of a smooth round edge on the side of my text. And of course you can tweak this to your own liking. You can make it more, you can make it less. Maybe you don't like this styling at all. Maybe you want it to be this one where it has sort of a double indent on it. You know, you can have fun with the styling of your text and make it more unique. So if anyone's seen the 3D titles that people use on sort of their, you know, different movies or different short films or, you know, TV shows, this is sort of the process, one of the process that you might go through towards creating those type of text elements. So now everyone has the basic idea of how to sort of create your own sort of movie title text in 3D. So that's one way that we would do it inside of Cinema 4D. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to show everyone the other way to do this, and then I'm actually going to give everyone a chance to sort of, you know, create a mini scene using type inside of Cinema 4D. So this is the first way that we can create type inside of Cinema 4D. Now for the second way, and the way that's probably a lot faster, is to come up to our cube item up here, which is more of our just, I guess our parametric objects is technically what these are called. But up here, if you might have noticed from last time when you were creating your objects using the cube and the cylinders and the spheres and other shapes, there's also one here at the bottom left on my view that says text. And if you add this into your scene, boom, we got text. And if I come up here, I can change the text here. I'll go with Wanda this time. So now I have, well, I don't need the one in the front, but I have Wanda's name in 3D, and I can come up here and let's choose a different font. Obviously I have way too many fonts that I probably never really use. Here, we'll go with that, sort of a fun font there. And just like when we were using our spline and our extrude object, there are a number of different properties that we can adjust here as well. So up top, of course, is the depth. And then you can see that along here, there are many similar tools to the ones that we just talked. The text tool is very similar to the spline tool, just that it sort of automatically extrudes it. Now I will note here that if you're using a different version of Cinema 4D, this is actually called something different. It's called MoTeX. So that used to be the old name for this, and that actually used to be in the motion graphics tools or the cloner tools. So if you don't see it in the object tool and you're using a different version of Cinema 4D, that would be why. You would probably need to go to MoGraph and go to MoTeX. Otherwise, it works the exact same way. They just renamed it for this version of Cinema 4D. But like I was saying, this has many of the tools that we just discussed. So you can see that align, height, horizontal scaling, all of these tools are still here. Caps is also still here. So if I want to add some rounding to the edges, or if I want to load a different preset for how I want the type to look on the edges, that's also here as well. The difference when using this tool, and eventually we'll get to this, is that using this tool, the text object tool, or MoTeX is what it used to be called. Oh, are they new to this version? They're new to the last two versions of Cinema 4D. They didn't used to always have it. It is a rather new addition to have the presets. You used to have to do everything by hand and figure it out. So they're relatively new to Cinema 4D. So yeah, if you've had any experience with that before, you'll know that that was not always there, and it is really handy to have. But the other cool thing that you can do with this text tool, formerly known as MoTeX, is it also has options to add effectors, which are Cinema 4D's ways of modifying the text. So I'll show you really quickly. If I go to letters and I go to MoTeX and I add, say, a random effector, now all the text automatically is manipulated and moved around, and I can still change this at the same time. And once we get into doing animation and stuff like that, you can even come over here, go to noise, hit play, and now your text will move around and you can have it do sort of fun stuff like that. There's a lot more that you can do with it, but I just wanted to show you up front that you can have, you know, eventually once we get into animating and stuff, you can have a lot of fun with your type and have it do cool things. Of course, this isn't limited to just type. You can do this with objects and other stuff like that. But just so you can see some of the funner stuff that you can do with type, since I know type is usually kind of boring, you know, you can have fun with it. So that's what we have there. And then the last thing that I'm going to show everyone before I give you a chance to create some type using your own sort of characters is sort of the styling that you can do with your text as well. So I'm going to copy this, and I'm actually control dragging this on the keyboard to make an automatic duplicate so I can hide my old one, because now what I'm going to do is I'm going to choose a new name. Let's see what we got here. We got Spider-Man. All right, so let's go for Spider-Man and give it a second to refresh. All right, well, I got 2 S's there. I don't want 2 S's on Spider-Man's name. All right, so now I got Spider-Man. So the cool thing, assuming I can type Spider-Man correctly here. Okay, so the cool thing that we can do with type inside of Cinema 4D is there are automatic ways in order to get particular colors on different parts of it without having to do a lot of extra work. So Spider-Man, as I'm sure a lot of you are aware of, his primary colors are red and blue. So I'm going to make some materials here at the bottom, and I'm just double tapping in my area here, and I'm just modifying the colors in the color channel to be red and blue. And I'm going to throw the blue color on here. So right now my whole text is blue, which is cool. Like, it's not bad. And once you're able to throw in some lights and some environments, which we'll get to in the second half of today's lesson, you know, it's going to look really cool. But let's say, for example, I wanted to have the face be a red color. You know, maybe make it pop a little bit more, have it a little bit more stand out. What I can do here is I actually can have multiple materials on it at the same time, and I can make a selection or tell it what the selection is for different parts of the text. So if you've been looking at the text, you might have noticed that there's another section that I didn't talk about called selections. And these selections are actually different parts of the text that are automatically configured in order for you to add stuff to them by default. You'll see that over here on the side, and I'll zoom in real quick. There are different letters here, C1, C2, R1, R2, and all these other ones down here. All these are different selections that you can use in order to specify where different materials show up on your text. So you can either type these letters in by yourself, or you can click the check marks here and that'll activate them as well. So for example, if I wanted this to be on the front face and the back face, which you can't see, I would turn on C1 and C2, which is the start and end cap. And then with my material tag selected, I can actually left click and drag this into the selection, and it'll go on to the selection tag. And I did C2, which means it's actually on the back here. So what I should have done is I should have dragged C1, and now you can see that my text is just on the front face of my text. So I was able to go to our text object, turn on the start cap and the end cap, C1 and C2, select my material on my object, and then drag the tag or the selection tag from my object into the selection menu on my material tag, and that will set the material that's only going to be appearing on the front face. And if I wanted this to be on the back as well, I can duplicate this material. So you can either drag it from the bottom here and drag it again on top of the text, or I can control drag to duplicate it. And instead of having C1 in here, I'm going to type C2. And if I look at the back, now it's red on the back. So just like that, we can make our text a little bit more interesting than the bland look that we had before. And if, for example, we wanted to have, say, the black sort of lines that are on Spider-Man's chest as, you know, some sort of motif in our design here, I can make a new material, make it black, and drag it on top of our text. And then instead of having it completely cover my text, I can look here, look at selection and say, oh, I would like the bevel, which is R1, to have just this black text. So I would come up to my material tag for my black here, and in the selection I could type in R1, and now if I zoom in here, you'll notice that I have a black bevel ridge edge around here. Now, one thing to keep in mind is that if you have not changed your caps to have bevels, you won't see any bevels when you add a material to it because they won't exist. So if I were to, like, say, take this off, you'll see that now I don't have any bevels. So in case you're adding materials and you're trying to see stuff but you don't see it happening, make sure you actually have that featured enabled inside of Cinema 4D. So right now I have text on the front, text on the back, and let's say I wanted to just have, you know, a quick floor in my scene. I wanted to make, you know, a quick light here, put it over here, maybe make it area light, maybe size it a little bit directly. And this is what I'm going to have everyone do in a second on your own time, so you don't have to rush along with me right now. Maybe I give it sort of a drop shadow here, and let's see how this looks. So we got, you know, let's move this light a little bit back forward in space here. All right, so we got a bit of some 3D type in our scene here. Now, of course, you can go crazy with this, have more of an interesting environment, you know, throw in some custom materials. But, you know, just really quickly showing you how you can create type inside of Cinema 4D. So let me see on my list here of things I have until you guys can just take a little bit of a break and try this for yourselves as well. So the last thing I wanted to explain here is just a little bit in your render settings in terms of different features you can enable. I saw before that some of you figured out how to add glow on top of your text, which is really cool to see. So some of you might be familiar that there are different render features, special effects, you could say, that you can enable. But one of them is really handy for type to sort of make it pop a bit more. And that's something called ambient occlusion. I don't know, has anyone heard of that before or knows of that term? Let me know in the chat or yell it out. But ambient occlusion is a feature that you can enable on a lot of 3D programs, not just Cinema 4D. Blender has this, Unreal Engine, Unity, for those of you who are familiar with doing different type of things in the video game world. And some programs or some render engines, in games, some programs, some video game engines, this is sort of like a default thing, so you don't have to enable it. But we're using sort of the standard render engine right now, so we do have to enable it. So in order to turn this on, we come up to the top to our edit render settings. And then in here, you'll notice that there are, under the effects option, there are a number of different effects that you can enable. The first one is ambient occlusion, which is the one we're going to go to, but you'll see that there are some here, such as cell renderer, depth of field, global illumination is one that you might want to keep in mind because we'll be talking about that pretty soon. Glows, object glows, and you can feel free to try these whenever you want to check them out. Some of these work pretty well, some of these work, so-so. Some of these will add a lot of render time to your program or to your project, so keep in mind some of these might make things a lot longer than you think, or things render a lot longer, but ambient occlusion now is pretty fast on most modern machines. It's debatable, but you can just come up here and enable this, and you really by default don't have to do much more with it. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to zoom into my type here, and I'm going to render this scene real fast. And what I think I'm going to do is right now I'm going to change my type to a different one just so you can see this effect a lot more. And I'm going to choose basic flat rim. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to turn it off. I'm going to render to my picture viewer. So this is the type without ambient occlusion and just my basic shadow on. And then I'm going to turn on ambient occlusion by hitting the check mark here. And then I'm going to hit Shift R on my keyboard in order to render it, or you can come up here and go render to the picture viewer. And now I'm going to do an A and B comparison, which you can do by hitting A and B on the keyboard. And I can drag this line, and you should be able to see that now when I bring the line up, you can see that there's a lot more shading between the edges here. And if I bring it down, there's a lot less shading. So basically it gives you sort of, shading without actually having, lights in your scene, or as many lights as you would need in order to give a bit more feel, a bit more realistic edge to your type or to your characters. This is something that's used a lot in terms of character work to add a bit more realism or a bit more dynamics to your different creations that you're creating, or props. A lot of times in video games, this is something that's baked in. So something that's really helpful if your text is looking really plain, and of course you can boost this up. So I'll go to absurd number here just so you can see it. So if I bring it to 100, you can see that it really adds a lot of shading. This is probably not particularly pleasing to most people's design sensibility, so be careful if you're going to up the contrast a lot. Some of these things might be better at a more tasteful level than sort of cranking them up to 11. But it's something that's really handy to know, and it can be useful in pretty much any situation, just to sort of add a bit more life to your elements, to whatever you're creating inside of 3D. And again, some programs do this by default and you don't even have to think about it, but it's good to understand that this is a process that you might have to keep in mind. So that's the basis of 3D type inside of Cinema 4D. Again, if anyone has any questions on this, please let me know, and I'll be more than happy to help you. But what I'm going to do, and let me save this because I have not been saving my project, which is not good to do. So let me make sure that I save this. Type example. So of course I encourage everyone to make sure they're saving, or at least have autosave turned on, because that will save you some heartache in the future. So what I'm going to ask everyone to do is to basically build their own scene, their own 3D type scene. So you may have been following along, and if so, then you might already be ahead of the game. But if not, this is going to be your chance to take 15-20 minutes to create your own 3D type, mini scene here with what I've discussed so far. So using a favorite character from any medium. So if you have put a name in the chat and you want to use that name, that's totally cool. Or if you want to think up a new name, that's totally fine as well. But basically, I just want you to create a scene using type, having some materials, cameras, a bevel style as I've shown, maybe using a unique font. If you want to use a floor in your scene like I have, that's totally cool. Or maybe you want to do it in sort of a plain, sort of empty space. It's up to you, as long as it has some sort of styling to it, is really what I'm going for here. But yeah, I just want you to take some time, render out an image. So like we've discussed before, hitting Shift R, render to the picture viewer, you can go to File, Save Image As, and submit, a JPEG or a PNG. So I'm just going to ask you, let me cancel this real fast. Submit an image to the in-class Dropbox, which I will put a link in the chat. There we go. So that should allow everyone to submit an image of their own creation to the in-class Dropbox. So yeah, so just take some time, get used to playing around with the type tool. About 15 minutes, maybe 20 minutes if people need a bit extra time. So of course, once you finish, feel free to get up, take a break, get some water, go to the bathroom, do whatever, if you finish with enough time. And I will set a timer here, so it's not like it'll be unknown how much time you have left. But yeah, I'm going to give you at least 15 minutes to start off here, just to sort of get used to familiarize with the type tool, either using the spline text tool and using the extrude object, or just using the text object is totally fine. I just showed you both ways. I definitely think the text object is easier, although I am showing you the other way because that will be important to know later on. But either method is totally fine. But yeah, so just take some time, get familiar with the tool, and then, you can also take a break as well. So I'm going to set a timer here for 15 minutes, and then I will let everyone have at it. And again, I'll be here if you have any questions, just, raise your hand or shoot a message, and I will get in touch with you.